Hello everyone, welcome back to another Project Gladiator weather forecast. Today I'll be covering the weather for September 13th of 2023, and currently we have three main regions for severe thunderstorm development. We do have this marginal threat for the New England region, which does include Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and maybe the eastern half of Long Island. This is one of the marginal threats I will be covering in today's forecast. We also do have another marginal threat for southeastern Arizona into southern New Mexico and western Texas. This is one of the marginal threats that I also will be covering in today's forecast, but we also do have a marginal threat for parts of eastern Georgia and eastern South Carolina and southeastern North Carolina. This is a marginal threat that I will not be covering in today's forecast. However, do keep this marginal threat in mind and do say weather alert if you do live in this affected region. However, again, I will not be covering that in today's forecast. As for threats for today, we do have two regions of 2% tornado threat. We do have this 2% tornado threat for Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, as well as a 2% tornado threat for southeastern New Mexico and western Texas. We could see some weak tornadic development in both of these regions, but as for wind, we do have a three different 5% wind threats, one for each of the marginal threats. As for hail, we do have a 5% hail threat for the marginal threat for southern New Mexico, Arizona, and western Texas. We did have a 5% hail threat for this marginal threat here. However, that has been removed. Actually, I think it was a 5% wind threat. It wasn't a 5% hail threat, but we do have a 5% hail threat for southern New Mexico, Arizona, and western Texas. Again, the only marginal threats that I will be covering in today's forecast will be for the New England region and for the southwestern United States region. Taking a look at the tropics, primarily focusing on currently a Cat 2 Hurricane Lee. Hurricane Lee is going to continue to weaken from here, and it isn't going to strengthen back up anymore. You can see right now it is a Category 2, but it is expected to slowly weaken into a Category 1. And then as it does get close to the New England region, we could see impacts across the New England region anywhere from Maine into Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. That far east, mainly in anywhere in the circle, we could see some impacts from Hurricane Lee. But however, it isn't going to be a hurricane when it does impact the New England region. It is likely going to weaken back down to either a mid-end to upper-end tropical storm, but it isn't expected to be a hurricane. However, we may be able to see some minor impacts outside of this cone, but overall our main threats are going to be the potential for heavy rain and flash flooding across the New England region. It could, again, impact as a tropical storm or a very low-end Category 1, but I think it is going to be more of a tropical storm when it does impact, and again, anywhere from Maine into New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, anywhere in the circle, could see the main threat of flash flooding and maybe some heavy rain. But overall, I did cover Hurricane Lee yesterday and on the weekly overlook, so you can either check out the end of yesterday's forecast or the weekly overlook, and I did go over Hurricane Lee, but I likely will not be going in depth on Hurricane Lee in today's forecast. I will be focusing on the three different marginal threats. But overall, if you do want more information on Hurricane Lee, do make sure to check out the very last portion of yesterday's forecast or the weekly overlook. Taking a look at our radar omega model, starting off with our 500 millibars like we usually do, focusing on the marginal threat for the southwestern United States. Let me turn off the map here so we can see a little bit better. You can see that we do have the subtropical jet coming out of the Pacific. This has been stalled across the southwestern United States for quite some time now. It is going to stay stalled across the southwestern and southern United States for a vast majority of not only this week, but also maybe parts of next week as well. We do have a little bit of a ridge situated across the western United States into the Central Plains, which is going to be pushing and keeping that subtropical jet across the southern United States. But overall, we could see some severe weather development, just like the last couple of days across the southwestern United States, mainly across Arizona, New Mexico, and western Texas. We do have a little bit of lee troughing with the mountains across this region, but we could also see some elongated photographs because of the mountains, as well as the mountains do tend to block a little bit of the lower level winds, and do lead to some elongated photographs to support the possibility of some small to medium hail across this region, as well as you can see that the mid-level flow in the subtropical jet is mostly zonal, so you may be wondering where we're getting our directional shear from, and we are expected to see a little bit of change in direction from some of the mountains across New Mexico, which is why we don't have a 2% tornado threat anywhere where the mountains usually are. We are expected to see that 2% tornado threat just to the east of the mountains, because the mountains are going to be causing a little bit of a change in direction in the winds in some of the lower levels to support the possibility of some directional shear to support 1 or 2 brief tornadoes across that region in that 2% tornado threat. But then you can see that the subtropical jet does continue across the southern United States and is expected to merge with this trough coming out of Canada. We have been focusing on this trough a lot this week, and it does have that cold front that has passed through, and this cold front is expected to continue out into the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, that cold front is going to influence Hurricane Lee a little bit, and it is going to introduce some wind shear into the Atlantic Ocean, and is going to significantly weaken Hurricane Lee down into a Category 1 and then into a tropical storm. So that's why we aren't expected to see it strengthening anymore, is because of that cold front and that trough introducing some wind shear into the Atlantic Ocean. And you can see the subtropical jet does continue across the southern United States and then does veer a little bit up to the north, and that is going to be the primary triggering factor for that marginal threat across the eastern United States coast. But then with that cold front that I did mention, that cold front is continuing to propagate eastward, so that cold front could also influence this marginal threat for the eastern United States, as well as this marginal threat for the New England region. But we are also going to see a little bit of aid from this marginal threat from this trough to help support the possibility of severe thunderstorm development across that marginal threat for the New England region. Taking a look at our dew points, focusing on the marginal threat for the New England region first, you can see that we do have dew points that are going to be coming from the Atlantic Ocean. We are expected to see a bunch of moisture come out of the Atlantic Ocean. We typically do see a lot of moisture across this region from the Atlantic Ocean, but then that cold front is also going to be pushing a lot of the moisture from the vast majority of the eastern United States and concentrating it a little bit further eastward. And with help from the Atlantic Ocean, we could see dew points that are going to be ranging anywhere from the upper 60s into the low 70s, which will definitely support the possibility of some fairly strong instability across this region. But then if we take a look at the marginal threat for the southwestern United States, you can see that we aren't really expected to have all that strong moisture across this region, because it is fairly desertous across this region. However, we could see a little bit of moisture from the Gulf of California. I finally learned the name of this gulf. And this gulf is going to be giving this region a little bit of moisture, but some of the storms that we have had across this region, we've had a few rounds of storms across this region, so that could also be adding to the moisture in the atmosphere across this region and helping build instability. But then you can see that our dew points are going to be ranging anywhere from the upper 50s into the low and possibly the mid 60s in some regions. We do have this area right here across central Arizona where we could see maybe a little bit of some stronger instability across that region, but we are expected to see some fairly moderate instability across this region, as the dew points across this region are going to be fairly moderate. Taking a look at our temperatures, mainly focusing on the marginal threat for the southwestern United States, you can see that we are expected to have temperatures that are going to be ranging anywhere from the 60s and into the 70s and possibly the 90s across southwestern Arizona. We could maybe see a little bit of some stronger instability where we have some of the stronger dew points across central Arizona and some of the more intense heat. However, we have had rounds of storms across this region, which is going to be significantly cooling down this region. So we could see overall some weaker instability compared to the last couple of days. However, we could also definitely see mostly moderate instability to support the thunderstorms that we are expected to see today. But then if we take a look at the marginal threat for the New England region, you can see that we are expected to have temperatures that are going to be ranging anywhere from the low 70s into possibly the mid and upper 70s across this marginal threat region. This cold front, you can see that cold front fairly prominently here, and this is expected to lower temperature significantly across a vast majority of the United States. We were expected to see temperatures earlier on in the week across the Central Plains. At night, it was expected to get down into the low 50s, but that has increased a little bit. But you can see across the Ohio River Valley into the northern Midwest, you can see that we do have very, very cold air at night, at least. Temperatures are expected to get as low as the 40s, the 45s, mid 40s, and even into the 30s, the upper 30s across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Michigan Peninsula. So we are expected to see a major decrease in heat with that cold front that has passed through in that trough. But then you might have noticed something. We do have another cold front that is expected to make its way across the Central Plains and the Ohio River Valley later this week and into early next week as well. I will cover this a little bit more on the weekly overlook for next week. But you can see that this is expected to possibly lower temperatures at night across the Central Plains and Northern Plains significantly. But again, I will have more information on this on the weekly overlook for next week. But do keep that in mind for next week. We are expected to see much cooler temperatures across this region because of the two cold fronts that have moved through. We could see significantly lower temperatures across not only the northern Central Plains into the Central Plains and the Ohio River Valley and the New England region as well. Taking a look at our instability, starting off with a marginal threat for the southwestern United States. You can see where we did have some of those stronger dew points across central Arizona. We do have a little bit of stronger instability, possibly getting into what appears to be the low 2000s. However, across a vast majority of this marginal threat, this instability is not very impressive at all. This instability is going to be typical this time of year for desertous regions, especially across the southwestern United States. We are expected to see instability that is going to be ranging anywhere from the triple digits into the low and possibly getting close to the mid 1000s across some regions. But overall, this instability is not impressive at all. So overall, our threats for everything, including our tornado threat and our damaging wind threat and hail threat, is going to be fairly weak because we have overall very, very weak instability across this region, which is only going to really support the possibility of a minimal threat for all of our hazards. But then if we take a look at the marginal threat for the New England region, you can see that we do have a little bit better instability because it is closer to the Atlantic Ocean. However, it isn't expected to be all that impressive either. We are expected to see Cape values are going to be ranging anywhere from the 1000s and possibly mid 1000s, and that's going to be pretty much it as far as instability for the marginal threat region for the New England region. Of course, with the veering of the winds and some of the directional shear that we have from this trough moving through, we could see the possibility of the main threat of one or two brief tornadoes and damaging winds across this region. But that's going to be overall it for this region. Again, with some of the elongated photographs with the mid-level flow aloft in the subtropical jet and some of the lower level winds being blocked by the mountains, we could see some small to medium hail across this region, as well as the threat of maybe one or two brief tornadoes with that 2% tornado threat with some weak directional shear. But overall, this instability is not very impressive, so I don't really think that we're going to have all that much of a strong potential for anything across this region. Taking a look at our energy helicity index, focusing on the two different 2% tornado threats, starting off with the 2% tornado threat for western Texas into southeastern New Mexico. You can see the only place that we really have notable energy helicity index readings to support the possibility, and that will be indicative of that 2% tornado threat, is going to be right around western Texas and southeastern New Mexico. This will definitely be supportive of that 2% tornado threat. However, overall, our directional shear may be a little bit questionable because of our mid-level flow being fairly zonal. However, some of the mountains may be able to break up some of the airflow and get it to veer it in wind or direction, and maybe supply a little bit of directional shear across this region. But overall, our directional shear is going to be fairly questionable. So we are expected to see maybe a 2% tornado threat across this region. But with our fairly unimpressive instability across this region, we are expected to see a very minimal 2% tornado threat across this region. But then if we focus on the 2% tornado threat for the New England region, you can see that some of the storms have already concluded across this region. However, we do have a little bit of some storms ongoing that could still support the possibility of that 2% tornado threat. We do have a few energy helicity index readings that would be indicative of that 2% tornado threat, but overall this is a event of severe thunderstorms that is going to begin to come to an end. It was more impressive earlier on in the day, but as of making this, the storms are beginning to die down and move out the area, so we aren't really expected to see all that much of a strong potential for tornadoes across this region anymore. Now that I've told you the weather, please go down to the description and check out the search list for Project Gladiator, and join the Discord for any updates on Project Gladiator. If you live in any of the areas that I covered for today, please stay weather alert for the time being, and hopefully I will be able to see you guys tomorrow with another forecast.